Well, hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here and you're not familiar with me, my name is Simon Good and I'm a professional mediator. I deal with conflict in workplaces as well as outside of work, like families going through divorce and separation and that kind of thing. I do training in conflict resolution skills, and in this video I'm going to be analysing a particular workplace conflict case study. We're looking at a company within the construction sector and a particular staff member called Jake. So I'm going to read the case study and then I'll explain some of the options, I suppose, that Jake might have to deal with the situation that he's facing. And this is the first time I'm recording this kind of video, but my intention is that, you might pick up on actual practical tools and tips that I'll talk about, like say this or do this. This could be some option that might be helpful. But I think particularly for newer staff, if you're not used to thinking about conflict in a strategic kind of way, the risk is that we make all sorts of mistakes. Like we make the mistake of assuming that everybody thinks the way that we do, for example, or we just go into an autopilot default type of response for dealing with a situation. So hearing the way that I reflect and analyze almost the different conflict situations that I'm looking at, especially with my background as a mediator, and I have a degree in psychology as well as an MBA, that this might allow you to develop some additional insight. So even though you might not take the exact course of action that I'm talking about in this video, it might prompt some additional option generation or problem solving and that kind of thing. So let's have a look at this case study and the staff member Jake, what he's up against, and then we can think about some of the options that he could use to respond. So Jake has worked in construction for 15 years and recently started on a new project. His new manager, Sarah, is younger and has a background in engineering, but little on-site experience. Sarah insists on implementing changes to construction workflows based on her technical knowledge, which Jake believes are impractical. Tensions rise when Sarah overrides Jake's decision on a safety measure. Jake feels undermined and questions whether Sarah values his expertise. Oh, I got a message coming through. I'll just put do not disturb to make sure I don't get any more of those until I finish the video. So Jake's feeling undermined here and he questions whether Sarah values his expertise. So that's an interesting one, isn't it? Like, what does Jake mean by valuing? How would he get an idea about what Sarah values things? Like, if she did value something or didn't value something, what does that actually mean? I think in reality, it often actually comes down to behavior. Like, what do I want her to do or what do I want her to stop doing? But that's an interesting way of phrasing it, isn't it? She doesn't value this. She doesn't value me. She doesn't value this priority that's important. So the second paragraph there, the situation escalates when Sarah schedules a meeting without consulting Jake, which conflicts with an important safety inspection he needs to supervise. Jake expresses his frustration in front of the team, saying, "This is why all these plans fail. No one listens to those who actually do the work." Sarah feels publicly disrespected, and the two now avoid direct communication, impacting on team morale and efficiency. Gosh, it really does sound like quite a nightmare situation, doesn't it? Not only has it been this issue that's been percolating and brewing behind the scenes, but now it's not just the two of them that are impacted. The problems are starting to spread to the other people that are involved as well. So what could Jake do about this? Like, what are some of the options that he could consider? Well, I suppose before I go into what I think about it, I wonder, what do you think? What jumps out at you about this particular scenario? Have you dealt with a situation like a Sarah in the past and you've got a new graduate or someone like that that comes in and they want to throw their weight around? And gosh, it can be incredibly frustrating, can't it? Let alone the actual practical impact of that kind of an issue. Or maybe you've been in Sarah's situation and you're dealing with a experienced professional, maybe 30 years experience as a bricklayer or a carpenter or a concreter or something. And now you're needing to tell them, actually, that's not the way that we do things these days. We need to update our methodology or something like that. It would be very easy, wouldn't it, to see that each of these perspectives are reasonably valid. So I suppose that would be the first thing that Jake might consider, is shaking up some of that black and white perspective that he has on this situation. When I train people in conflict resolution skills, I often talk about a scaffolded set of steps that you can take. So at the beginning, the first step, and I think actually it's the vital fundamental layer in the scaffold that we're building, is self-regulation. Depending on how upset Jake is, he might need to do some things like breathing techniques or a mindfulness activity to redirect his perception. It might be going for a walk or having something to eat or getting an ice pack and putting it on the sides of his neck or washing his face or something like that. A little bit of a reset. Because as he becomes more and more escalated, what's going to happen is that it starts to affect both his perception as well as the way that he's processing that information that's coming in. He'll look at more negative signs that Sarah's doing the wrong thing, for example, and information that confirms what he already knows, which is the reality that she is such a jerk and she doesn't value what's important or whatever else it might be. But that, of course, that's not a true version of reality. Probably she's acting from a whole bunch of different mixed emotions and motivations. And so thinking that it's all about him or all about this single issue, at the very least, it would be oversimplifying things. So from Jake's perspective, what I would often encourage him to do is do what he needs to do to calm himself down. I particularly like breathing techniques for this, really focusing on that breath out. The long exhale, when we fully empty our lungs, it often helps to slow our heart rate, helps us to feel more calm as a result. It's more effective if you use your nose. At least 6 seconds roughly is the ideal time for the exhale out. But with that first breath, you might like to just breathe out all of the way. Just keep breathing out and keep breathing out and keep breathing out. And, Jake might be surprised at just how much air is actually in his lungs. And then when he's breathed all of the way out, it creates a lot of physical space. It's like these two balloons that are inflating as we breathe in and deflating as we breathe out. So some people find a tingling sensation kind of thing when they've breathed out all of the way. And of course, this interrupts that automatic fight or flight response that our body goes into in response to conflict. If we feel under threat, we get ready for physical reactions. It's fight or flight. And that's probably not ideal if Jake's scheduling a meeting with Sarah to discuss the issues and with the communication between them. So breathing techniques or mindfulness and redirecting your perception, I think that would be that fundamental layer. And then from there, the next step would be analyzing the conflict situation. What's actually going on here? So for Jake, he might think about Sarah. Like, what matters to her? What does she care about? Is it establishing her credibility or authority, or what do you think might be going on here? What would she be insecure about if there's something that she's insecure about? What would be a goal that she has for this next few months if she's got a goal that she's working towards? I think in reality, a lot of the way that people behave isn't so conscious. It's not like they set a goal and then they follow it like a laser. But if he can think about what's important for Sarah, it gives him information about the tools that he can use to influence it. Like as he's negotiating, for example, the rescheduling of that date that she's got that clashes with the other safety inspection. Or as he's thinking about, like, this needs to change in terms of the communication. Of course, she'll have particular things that are important to her or not. And if he can think those things through, it's going to mean that he can be much more accurate at the kinds of things that he offers, the questions that he asks, that kind of thing. You might also think about what kind of conflict this is. So I talk about the 5 types of conflict when I'm running conflict resolution training. Data conflict, which is the facts. That might be something like, this safety inspection is not negotiable, and Sarah might not realize that. So that could be one pathway, I guess, that Jake could use to deal with this conflict with Sarah, talking about the facts and the data. What is optional and what's not? Where's the level of flexibility? What are the deadlines that they need to meet? If they don't meet those deadlines or they don't meet those obligations, what's going to happen? Is it like a slap on the wrist kind of thing? Or if there's really serious consequences, that might be something that's important that Sarah's aware of. So if we deal with conflict at this data layer, it's really because the other person understands the information differently to we do. And we need to tread a little bit carefully here. And it's interesting, I think, in this particular case study, I think Jake would need to tread really quite carefully, because if he comes into what you would say, it's being perceived as criticism. If he comes in and Sarah thinks that he's having a go at her and he's telling her that she doesn't know what she's doing or she's immoral and unethical and not doing the right thing, so I don't think you're capable, or I don't think you're ethical, so to speak. Like, I think you're an idiot, or I think that you're a jerk. that type of connotation, if that's the way that Sarah perceives it, is going to set her off. She's going to experience that as a threat and it will trigger some defensiveness and resistance. So if Jake decides to raise this issue, he really does need to tread a little bit carefully in terms of the phrasing and language and that kind of thing. For me, I often find it helpful to talk about the conflict in a way that's neutral and mutual. So this might be saying something like, I'd like to talk about how communication has been between the two of us. I know we've had a few bumps in the road along the way so far, but I'd like to see if we can figure out a way to change what needs to be changed or tweak some of the smaller things so that we can communicate more effectively moving forward. We've got different styles, we're going to have different approaches, but at least from my perspective, I'm willing to do my best to see what we can manage in terms of improving things. What do you think? So you could also think about this conflict, though, in terms of interest conflict. Interest conflict is like, what do I want and what do you want? Like maybe Sarah does want a level of authority or autonomy, or she's trying to get a gold star on her chest so that she gets a promotion, or maybe she's just worried about getting through probation or something like that. So you could offer her something like, if we can reschedule this date, then this is what I'd be willing to do for you. If you, then I. Or in other words, you could say it like, this is what I can do for you. In order for me to do that, I need you to do this. So it's that give and take, the reciprocal kind of way that we're dealing with the conflict. And that's not about the facts. I'm not hammering home the fact that we've already missed 3 deadlines and this is going to be the 3rd one that we miss. I'm effectively saying, look, if we can keep this deadline, this is what I can offer you. This is something that's helpful. This is something that's beneficial. You know, it really would depend on the situation, what you actually offer, but that would be the next option that we have, is dealing with it at the interest conflict layer. So we've gone through data conflict and interest conflict. You could talk about values conflict, for example. Maybe Sarah feels like her authority has been undermined because in the previous position that she worked, someone like Jake would have come to her for approval without scheduling these dates, without even checking first. So Jake's got this value that she's undermining safety. She doesn't care about the workers' rights or what the people who are actually doing the work or whatever else it might be. The people on the ground should have some level of autonomy. That's a value that he's got. Sarah might have a different value, that we need to minimize costs or maximize growth, or maybe it's just do what you're told. That's her value, that she thinks because she's in a senior position, she should just be listened to. And we can deal with conflict at that value layer too, naming the two perspectives and then setting up a conversation about how we're going to figure this out, what's going to help moving forward. We could change the structure, like maybe communicating these dates differently, like putting them in a shared calendar or reminders or that kind of thing. Sitting down, Sarah and Jake, they might invite in, the big boss, one of the senior managers, to come in for an infrequent meeting, like once a month, where they go through all of the scheduling things if they're not able to resolve it themselves. So structural options could be another way to deal with this particular situation. And then the final one would be relationship conflict. So we're seeing this type of conflict playing out here. They're not talking to each other. They're not communicating directly, and it's starting to impact on the team morale and efficiency. So relationship conflict is the stuff like that need to say, I told you so, or we rub each other the wrong way, we just get irritated. The bloody look on that person's face or the tone of voice that they use, this kind of thing. So I think here there's probably not going to be a whole lot of fruit in going down this path. I wouldn't probably recommend that Jake asks Sarah if she wants to grab lunch sometime and talk it through. If he did want to deal with relationship conflict, it's probably more like you're giving her a chance to have a vent and have a say, especially if she feels like she hasn't been listened to until now, or some type of an apology. There's 5 types of apology that we could use. We could say, I'm sorry about that, or I'll make it up to you, or I'm not going to do it again. But I mean, all of these kind of options are not going to resonate with Sarah, at least from my reading of the situation. I don't know what you make of it. I think if Jake came up and said, I'm sorry, what Sarah's probably going to be looking for is a promise that he's not going to do it again. And I'm not sure, in the way that this is read, that Jake believes that he's in the wrong here. So I don't normally recommend that people apologize if they don't think that they're in the wrong. I think often comes across as a bit fake. It's a bit condescending or dismissive. I'm sorry, especially if you say something like, I'm sorry you feel that way, or I'm sorry that you just can't seem to figure out what's needed in this job. I'm sorry that you're such an idiot. I mean, there's all sorts of weasel ways that we can apologize, aren't there? But here I think what you might consider is more of a firm and probably a little bit more formal acknowledgement about what's happened and a shifting of focus. So again, I might say something like, look, I know that there's been a lot of tension between us. I've probably done things to upset you, and from where you sit, it probably didn't make a lot of sense at the time. Of course, we've got different ways of seeing the situation and different interpretations, so that makes sense why we've landed on different perspectives here. Look, the last thing I want is that we continue to butt heads moving forward. So I'm wondering if we can organise a time to talk through some of those decisions around methodology so that maybe we can figure out something that's going to work better moving forward. Does tomorrow morning work for you? So I think a short fuse appointment works there. Like, does tomorrow morning work, or are you free later this afternoon? I probably wouldn't want to give Sarah weeks and weeks to stew and mull and obsess over it when she knows that the meeting's coming up. And what I would do in that meeting is I would prepare to be dumped on. I'd say how things been between us, or I know some type of an acknowledgement, and then she's probably going to have a go at me. So if I'm Jake, I really need to be prepared for that self-regulation kind of stuff. Then the next step is going to be de-escalation, that low tone, lower volume, slower speed, just repeating back some of the words that they've said, allowing pauses, allowing a little bit of silence. Okay. Whether or not you decide to apologize after they've had a vent, like often it's quite helpful for them to get it off their chest, so to speak. And then if you're able to give some kind of an acknowledgement and then a shifting to the future and the solutions. Given all of that, I'm sorry to hear that's been your perspective, or that makes sense. I might feel the same way from where you're sitting. Of course, I see things differently, but we're probably not going to make much progress digging up through the dirt of the past. I'm wondering what would help moving forward. What kind of options have you used in previous situations where you've dealt with this kind of thing, or what do you think might help from your perspective in terms of structure? Maybe we could do a little bit of brainstorming, and it's probably not going to be a quick fix, but the last thing I want is for things to continue to deteriorate. So those would be probably some of the initial thoughts that I would have if I was dealing with Jake and he came to me for a little bit of coaching. But of course, even as I've explained some of those options, they're still quite open-ended, aren't they? It would depend on Jake and what kind of personality he is, and how important this is as well. If he's just completely under the pump and he's just struggling to keep his head above water in workflow at the moment, this might not be the right time of year to open up a big can of worms. But if it's something that's really causing problems, like the level of issue is quite significant, then maybe it makes sense even to postpone other meetings or to really prioritize this relationship with Sarah. I'm sure depending on the level of authority that they've got within the company, probably their manager's going to be making some of these decisions. But I wonder how you found that. Has it been helpful thinking about, and listening to the way that I think about these kind of conflict situations? And what would you do? I would be particularly curious to hear if you've got a different way of thinking about things, or maybe something that I said really has resonated with you and that's actually something that you found helpful too. That's going to be very useful for the other people who are viewing this video too, if you'd be willing to share some of your experiences in the comments. If it's been useful, I'd be incredibly grateful if you would press like, and writing a little comment like good or something like that helps the algorithm, of course. And if you'd like more tools and resources for dealing with conflict, whether it's workplace conflict or situations outside of work, please consider pressing subscribe. All right, let's leave it there. Hopefully see you in the next video. Bye for now.